Welcome to Manager Tools. Today's topic, the Collaborative Manager, Chapter 2, Tell Some to Wait. Here we go. I love collaboration. It's a great buzzword, right?
Yeah.
And it's talked about by people quite often who absolutely have no idea how to actually achieve it.
Yeah, it's something that happens in pretty commercials, but yeah, what's collaboration? Well, collaboration to a lot of people, I think, is brainstorming, and that's about it. But there's so many more things that the average manager can do to increase collaboration. And, I've always believed that an idea is a dangerous thing if it's the only one you have. And too many managers, I think, feel too much pressure and think that all the ideas need to be theirs, and yet don't know how to encourage more input from their directs. And so this series is designed to help managers get more input from more of their directs. Now, obviously, you could choose to ignore that input. The input may not be what you want, but that's the start of collaboration, is more voices being heard. And really, there's two parts of that, the voices and the hearing. And we're going to do a bunch on listening as well, because executives say all the time, listening is like 70% of my job. And if you're not a good listener when you're a manager, what makes you think you're magically going to flip a switch when you become an executive? There's an old saying, I love this saying, it's said about Americans, but it's true generally in my experience for half of the world, those who are D's and I's. In America, the opposite of talking is not listening, it's waiting to talk.
That's right.
Meaning I know what you're saying and I'm ignoring you. I'm getting ready to tell you what I really think.
Right. I'm dissecting your argument and ready to pounce.
Yeah, so this cast is really simple, guys. It's so basic. And basically all we're going to suggest to you is if you want more voices heard, one of the things you have to do is recognize that some of the voices who you on your team, you hear a lot of, and that's because they're naturally assertive communicators. And we're going to tell you two things. Ask those assertive communicators to wait, to slow down, to not be the first one to talk. And the second thing is provide them feedback when they do. It's only 2 points to this cast.
That's an interesting point, though, the idea of more collaboration. If you want to hear more from people, you have to tell some people not to, right?
Yeah, look, if you're a high I manager, no offense, guys, I'm a high I too, so I don't mean to poke fun at you and not at me, because I know I've done this too. Your definition of collaboration is everybody sitting around and you talking a lot. Okay, that doesn't feel collaborative to directs, in my experience. The idea here is that managers don't realize that some of the interplay, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's normal. If you're saying, oh my gosh, Mark's saying I made a mistake, that's not true at all. It's normal for you as a manager when you're talking about an idea to forget perhaps that you're the manager. We talk often in meetings that facilitating a meeting and providing content in a meeting both is hard to do. It's why we recommend managers having facilitators, somebody else facilitating the agenda so the manager can contribute content when he or she wants. Okay, but the thing that managers don't realize is, particularly if you're a high D manager, is that some people are talking a lot more than others, and it's a function in part of their DISC profile and probably your relationship with them and their confidence about their expertise. But one of the things you can do is simply ask for different behavior, and one of the places you can ask for different behavior is in meetings, and it's super simple. And by the way, we're going to go through this cast, and the entire time I want you to be thinking, before I do what Mark and Mike are suggesting, simply start paying attention to a couple of the comments we're going to make here about what we think is probably happening in your meeting. We'd be willing to bet that you are unaware of the percentage of talking that various people on your team do. And before you decide that you're going to do this, just ask yourself, well, are they right? You go to a series of meetings with your team. I'm assuming that most of you go to at least 4 in a month, probably more like 10. And if you're not doing staff meetings every week, you're smoking crack, and there's a cast for that. Okay, there's not a cast for smoking crack.
Yeah,
although we talk about it a lot of managers act as if they do that a heck of a lot. But just ask yourself in your next month, before you implement this guidance, okay, ask yourself whether or not we're right about what's happening in your meetings. And if we are, then you have a simple way. You're going to remember this cast, and you have a simple way to become more collaborative. It's as easy as suspensing it. If you're in your car right now, you're mowing the lawn, or you're doing laundry, next time you get to some place where you can write something down, or you get to your laptop, you get to your desktop, type a suspense a month from now, which says, was Manager Tools right? Do I have people contributing unevenly in my meetings? And then at the end of the month, if it's true, then maybe you need to do this. If it's not true, good on you. We probably
unlikely.
Yeah, unlikely. Yeah, so let's do this, okay? Let's be clear. When you want new or different behavior from your team, sometimes the best thing to do, usually, often, probably the best thing to do is to ask them to engage in the new behavior. Now, there are actually two ways to do this. I want to see if some of you who have been around a while can figure out one of the ways to do it. I think most of you will miss it. But what we ask people to do is engage in new behavior. Okay. So let's do this. Let's set up a scenario. You've got 4 people on your team. We're going to name them to alliterate with their DISC profiles. Dana is your ID, your dominant, forceful, outspoken, direct, sometimes brusque, direct. She's very no nonsense, not warm. India is a high I. She's super friendly, super outgoing, super assertive. Everybody loves her. Life of the team. Scatterbrained a little bit, but, super high energy. Scott is a high S. He's the warm, fuzzy guy in the team. Everybody likes Scott. Everybody gets along with Scott. Scott tends to be reserved. He's quieter. He knows how everybody's feeling. He's a great mentor to new people on the team, really makes people feel included. And Craig is a high C. He's your analytical person, your perfectionist, your dot your I's and cross your T's and then reach over and dot somebody else's I's and cross their T's. You absolutely rely on Craig for clear, precise, analytical thinking. He loves spreadsheets, very technically competent. Okay. So in this example, Dana and India are assertive. They're above the line on the DISC profile, and Scott and Craig on your team as S's and C's are not. They tend to be more reserved. What that typically means for a manager who has 4 in this case, Dana and India typically answer quickly when you ask questions in your meetings. Now, India almost always answers quickly. Sometimes when Dana answers quickly unless it's something Dana doesn't care about, in which case she fiddles with her pen and ignores everybody and acts superior. And I say that, guys, I'm a high D as well, so I'm poking fun at myself. And by the way, Mike too. Dana and India are assertive communicators. They typically answer quickly when you ask questions of your team in a meeting. Okay. They also take up more than half the time of talking that happens in discussions. That's what happens. They not only talk first, they talk more. Okay. In fact, they talk like 90% of the time in some cases.
And they talk forcefully, like they believe what they're saying.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing, right? If you're a high D or a high I manager, you tend to give credibility to those people who have a similar communication style to you. And D's and I's tend to say things as if things are true, that they know them to be true.
They assert S's them. They don't ask, what do you think?
Exactly, yeah. Right. Whereas S's and C's will put something out there and then ask what you think of it. They don't believe that idea any less, but their communication to somebody who's a D or I causes people to believe, oh, they don't really believe that to be true. They're just positing it as a potential situation. That's false. That's a judgment about their communication style, not about their strength of belief in the idea. They simply don't want their idea to be disrespectful to you, whereas D's and I's don't care and say, this is true because I say it's true. It's a function of how we communicate, not a function of how much they believe in the idea. And guys, even worse, when time on an agenda is short, and the D's and I's quickly throw stuff out there, we end up talking about the D's and I's ideas, and we don't hear from the S's and C's because they know time on the agenda is short, and they know the D and I is going to talk a lot.
And they're respectful. And it's particularly C's are respectful of the agenda. Right?
Yeah, they see that as respectfulness, right? And now that's not to say that an S or a C would say the D or I is disrespectful at all. They might. In some cases, they might. It depends on the person's ability to get along with others. But no, they think it's respectful. Let's let other people, let's hear other people's voices, right? Which would probably make them good collaborative managers. So certainly a high S would create a team that, he or she would prize. In this case, Scott would prize a collaborative team and would probably naturally work toward those things. So look, guys, before this cast, you might have said, oh, Dana and India talk maybe 60% of the time. And yeah, they often talk first, but Scott and Craig are probably at the 40% level. But in our experience, attending other managers' meetings, your numbers are probably biased, and so therefore they're skewed. It's probably more like 75% Dana and India. And there's a solid portion of you guys that allow Dana and India to take up 80 to 90% of most conversations. And Scott and Craig's input that you remember, we'd bet, is probably confined to, that seems right, or that's fine, or I'm okay with that, or as long as everybody else is okay with that.
Right.
In
that's
other
not
words, they
collaboration.
bless. Right. Yeah.
And that's not collaboration.
Well, I would argue actually it is to Scott and Craig. I mean, they're making their voice heard.
They're voicing support.
Right. Yeah. The question is, how do we want to define collaboration, right? And I think it's taking the buzzword out of it. If you think D's and I's are the only ones with ideas, and S's and C's job is simply to validate D's and I's, which D's and I's probably would say absolutely, right? Then okay, but that's not collaboration.
Not really. It's kind of like a tennis match. If there were two people playing tennis and one person were hitting the ball 50 times, and then every 50 times the ball went across the net, one came back, right? You wouldn't define that as a very good game, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't be very collaborative. Wouldn't even be very much fun, right? And frankly, guys, if your high C doesn't say much, we have this happens frequently. A lot of high D, high I managers suddenly have a realization of why Craig, the high C on the team, doesn't talk much. But when he does, he wants to prove that he's right, because that's what high Cs want to do. And suddenly he's talking a lot, and with some conviction that surprises other people relative to his normal quietness. And that can affect his ability to have relationships with other people on the team. But look, the problem with your assertive communicators talking so much and talking more than your more reserved team members, in other words, Dana and India dominating and Scott and Craig hanging back, is it isn't as collaborative as it could be if we made some simple behavior changes. And too many of us as managers, high D's, high I's, naturally assertive, a little more dominant, overrate, we mentioned this before, overrate the intelligence and effectiveness of others who are like us, and then underrate the intelligence and effectiveness of those people who are opposite than us in their behavioral style. In other words, they behave differently than us. So we end up hearing less from Scott and Craig, and then we tend to disregard some of what we hear from Scott and Craig because of our own bias.
Interesting enough, the recommendations we're going to make here are different than many folks might be expecting, right? Because I think most managers, what they end up doing is they go to the high C and the high S and say, contribute more, talk more, contribute more, talk more, right? And don't realize that there are behaviors of others that are causing them not to. Now, not to suggest that they shouldn't get that feedback. I'm not saying that at all, but we're doing something a little bit differently here. We're not talking to the S and C. We're talking to the I's and D's.
Right. We're talking to the D's and I's. Well, here's the beauty of manager tools. We've been doing this for a long time. And what we've discovered asking managers years ago, ask your S's and C's to talk more, is it doesn't work, or it only works for a little bit of time, because the S's and C's are not prepared to joust with the D's and I's, and the D's and I's suddenly think, why am I suddenly having to fight for time? And so they fight harder, and the S's and C's back down. No, guys, that's that's an oversimplification. It's not fair. We don't manage people as the group that they're in, but as a general rule, that's a way to look at things. So what we're going to do, this is part one, this is chapter 2, but it's part 1 of the strategy. We're going to ask the D's and I's to talk less.
It's just to give space to the S and C, to give them an opportunity to exercise or change behavior.
Then we'll ask the S's and C's for more input. Yeah. So here's what you could say. You could say, India, would you please wait a little longer before contributing in our next several meetings? Okay. You say, Dana, I'm trying to hear from everybody on the team a little more often. Would you please wait a bit before you contribute to discussions? Just pause a bit, let somebody else fill the void. Okay. And by the way, folks, filling that void, I just had a conversation with an associate who said, I hate that pause. I hate it. I can't stand for there to be dead air. I'm like, whoa, really? Whoa, you hate it? Yeah. Oh yeah, I hate it. I have to talk. So somebody has to be talking. I have to fill it up. Like, whoa, okay. I'm happy to fill it up, but I don't hate the dead air. I'm okay with people ruminating a little bit, but there are lots of D's and I's who feel the need to fill it up. Why would we have dead time in a meeting, right? If somebody's not talking, then nobody's listening. That's not good. Nothing's happening. Well, sometimes people's wheels need to turn. Another way you could say is, India, would you please try to hold off on contributing as much in meetings for a few weeks? It'll probably feel awkward, but it'll help me hear from others on the team.
So tell me, under what context are you giving this to your folks? Is this during the meeting and in front of others, or is this privately prior to the meeting during one-on-one?
Yeah, good. This is a great question. As I'm sitting here thinking about it, you're right. It could easily be to a manager who's just joining us, oh, definitely give that feedback out. To tell people, that's not feedback, but tell people that out loud in front of others. No. You would do this in a one-on-one. You would do it during an off moment before the meeting. You would do it in private to this one person, to India or to Dana. You could do it in passing. It's no big deal. I think a lot of managers think that this kind of guidance needs to happen in a formal setting, like a one-on-one or something. I just don't agree with that. I think that management is a normal day-to-day behavior if you make it a normal day-to-day behavior, right? As opposed, how many times have we told the joke of the manager who wants to give some, not really feedback, but wants to talk to somebody about a mistake they're making, and he or she goes by their cube at 7:30 in the morning, and they're there and says, hey, good morning, how are you? Good to see you, boss. How's it going? Fine. Hey, will you stop by my office at the end of the day? I need to talk to you about something. Right? It's like, now that's no longer a normal conversation, right? Now it's, in fact, that if that direct can wait all day, they are the prince of patience, because most directs would be like 9 o'clock in the morning. Hey, I actually have a break, so why don't we go ahead and talk now?
Right. Yeah.
The manager's like, I wanted you to talk to me at the end of the day. What? And the direct is going like, please,
just get this over with.
Tell me, let's get this over with. Okay, so you're absolutely right.
So not publicly. That's the point. This is not a public conversation.
Yeah. Some of you hopefully have figured this out. There's a second way we're going to tell you that you can do this beyond just asking. And we'll see if you can figure that out. But look, I want to cover something else. Some of your directs are just going to say, okay, I'll try to do that better. Or, hey, thanks, boss. Some of them, if you've been doing one-on-ones and feedback and coaching delegation, they might say, is this feedback? And you'll say, dude, no. You know how you'll notice feedback? And your directs will roll their eyes and go, yeah, boss. You'll say, can I give you some feedback? But some are going to ask why. When I get to the conference, often people are asking why, and of course the podcast doesn't allow for that, although we certainly have the forums. So here are some reasons, depending upon the direct you're talking to, that might be helpful, okay? So if they say, why? What's the problem? And you say, well, always talking first, or at least almost always, isn't always the best approach. Listening is a hugely important skill, particularly later in your career. Talking first usually means less listening. You could also say, sometimes agreeing with someone else who has reached the same conclusion as you is supportive of them. And we need to hear from them first before you can agree with them. Okay. Sometimes the first idea that gets thrown out gets more credibility and gets talked about, and it crowds out other ideas. And if you talk first, we're always debating your idea. And I want to hear from other people. Or I want to hear from others too. Others take longer to put their words together. You're pretty quick, which is good. And you waiting gives them more time. Right? Those are some simple things you can say. Now, you could combine those with the ask. You could mention that and then say, here's what I want you to do. It's generally been our experience that if you describe why you're saying something before you make the ask of a direct, when you're talking about the why, the direct is saying, why is she telling me this? Mm-hmm. Where's the punchline here? We have found that most directs, because of the role power of bosses, would prefer you say, this is what I want you to do. Would you please do it? And by the way, the phrase, would you please, really is helpful. We don't recommend you'd say, I'd like you to do X, because that's not asking. If you say, I'd like you to do X, that doesn't require the direct to commit to it by saying, I will. When you say, would you please, that's a question, which causes the direct it turns the conversation over to the direct, that's why you get questions, obviously. But if you ask them first and then explain why, it's easier for the direct to understand the why. If you start with why and then ask, while you're telling them the why, they're going to go, is this leading up to feedback? Am I in trouble? Right. I don't know what she's asking me, right? Okay, now, there is another way to do this, and hopefully a few of you have figured it out. In this particular example, what we're doing is we're asking for different behavior from our directs. Some of you hopefully have figured out you can make that question part of feedback to the more dominant person, because that's the last step in negative feedback, is asking them to change their behavior. Our point here is smart managers know you don't have to give feedback when you want a change in behavior, particularly when you're talking about something that isn't a negative. In this case, the fact that some people are dominant isn't a negative. It isn't. And some people being reserved isn't a negative. But if you want different behavior to achieve something unique, something a little bit different, something better, you don't have to give negative feedback about something someone might consider to be a strength. So you make the question you're asking part of the feedback model. In other words, Dana, can I give you some feedback? When you talk first in discussions and meetings, it makes it harder for me to hear from others on the team. Will you please wait to hear from others periodically before commenting? Now, guys, the problem with this kind of feedback is because it asks for a change in behavior, it's clearly negative feedback. So we only recommend this example, this using feedback as opposed to just asking. And of course, manager tools is much more about asking than it is about telling. Okay. We only recommend this for a direct with whom you have a solid relationship and they've been comfortable with feedback for a while, and probably even you're doing coaching and delegation as well. So don't just say, oh, they just told me give them feedback. No, we actually recommend, would you please, without the feedback on the front end, unless somebody is really, really good and you have a great relationship with them and they're comfortable with feedback. Because again, giving somebody feedback about a strength, which often is a strength for you, can be confusing at times.
Yeah, that's useful. That's the question I think a lot of folks had in my mind. Why not just give them negative feedback? Yeah, well,
right. Well, I think some people would say, why don't we just give them feedback? And they don't realize it from the direct's perspective.
It's going to be negative.
Even though, it comes across as negative because you're asking for a change. And whether you like it or not, folks, even if you are the sweetest person in the world and you're giving negative feedback with nothing but sweet tones in your voice, the fact is your direct knows that you control their addiction to food, clothing, and shelter, and there's always a bit of a sting. The more casual you can make it, the better, but there's always a bit of a sting.
Okay, but feedback does play a role, right?
Yeah, afterwards.
When it's positive, right? When they engage in the behavior, let's encourage it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not hard at all. Once we ask them, it's incumbent upon us to pay attention to their efforts and provide feedback when they do what we ask them to do, right? So as a general rule, in a situation like this, we recommend you choose to give only or nearly only positive feedback when you see the changes you want for more collaboration. In other words, don't give too much negative feedback when they don't do what you want. Because again, that's probably them, Dana and India, in this case, the high D's and I's. It's probably normal behavior for them, or it's something you've allowed or even encouraged. And positive feedback for the new behavior will make them want to do that more. Negative feedback for the old behavior can be confusing at times. So we're not asking them to fundamentally change their behavior forever in terms of becoming reserved. If we overdo the feedback, particularly negative, they're going to probably work overly hard on this and in times go too far. Now, keep in mind, guys, we're going to couple this with asking our less assertive team members, in this example, Scott and Craig, to speak up more and sooner too. But we're going to do that later after we've plowed the field for them a little bit. We've prepared the field. So here's how the feedback might sound. Dana, can I give you some feedback? She says yes. When you wait to speak up, like you did on the budget discussion and staff meeting today, it helps me run the team. Thanks. By the way, that was feedback to a ID. Notice I didn't say it makes other people feel good. Okay, because Dana doesn't care how other people feel. She's a ID. India, can I give you some feedback? When you let others speak before you, it lets more voices be heard and others feel better about being on the team. To a high I, that's good stuff. Again, back to Dana, the high D. Dana, can I give you some feedback? When you don't talk first, Craig gets time to make his point. That's helpful to me. Thanks. That's it. I mean, it's literally this simple, guys. You ask for the behavior you want, which is less quick input and less volume of input from your D's and I's. I'm going to tell you, if in fact they respond quickly, and for many of you with good relationships, they will, okay? Some of them may take a little longer, and you're going to have to give them positive feedback every time they take a small step in the right direction. They wait 5 seconds before they jump in, right? But there will be, to the point I made earlier about the person who recently told me I can't stand those dead spots. The meetings may be a little bit more dead for a few weeks until the S's and C's step in a little bit more. By the way, there's going to be a podcast coming up on collaboration about doing round robins where you ask everyone pointedly for their input. But it's no harder than that. And I suspect in this cast, most people would figure out, sure, I'll ask my more assertive people to wait, and then I'll ask other people to contribute more, right? And try to give them more positive feedback when they both do those things. But the real thing is being aware, for many of you, the value of this cast is, oh my gosh, they're right. I've got 2 people or 4 people, the high D's and I's, talking all the time. Now, if you have nothing but D's and I's on your team, you're probably fine. So point here is pay attention for the first time. Give it a month. Watch, look, listen. And you'll probably discover you've got some imbalance, and that imbalance is antithetical to some degree to collaboration. So ask your assertive communicators to wait, provide them feedback when they do. Guys, it's just not enough to hope for collaboration or hope for strategy or hope for new ideas or hope for good plans. Hope isn't a method. We have to work for those things with steps that, like these, that don't seem terribly exciting or interesting, and frankly, they seem pretty simple. And you don't just have to wait until you get what you don't want to give negative feedback. You can ask for what you want in advance, and then it gives you more chance to give positive feedback as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's it.
Awesome, my friend. I enjoyed that immensely.
Thanks, partner.
All righty. We'll see you. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you back here again next week. In the meantime, check out the discussion forums, www.manager-tools.com/forums. Hope to see you there. So long.